Fleets of up to 30 drifter battleships have been spotted in Anteovnuecci and New Eden space throughout the weekend. The first drifter fleet, referred to as a Death Ball, was identified early Saturday morning by an Arataka Research Consortium Hive fleet, as reported to the Intergalactic Summit by ARC spokesperson Uriel Anteovnuecci. According to Anteovnuecci, the heavily damaged ships immediately discharged their doomsday weapons against a member of the patrol group, and the remainder of the Capsuleer group scattered.
A second large group of drifters was spotted Saturday in the HTAC ADOC system in Kursk, where it was dispatched by a lone stealth bomber from the League of Svelte Men. The vigilant Tyrannos seemed ill-prepared to respond to the bombing run and were easily destroyed in their already damaged state.
On Sunday, a third fleet of drifters was spotted in the Rens system in Republic territory. Unable to bring capital ships or bombers to bear, and with most sub-capital doctrines ineffective against large numbers of drifters, the ARC task force used waves of inexpensive destroyers, losing just over 100 coercers to destroy 44 drifters in a series of engagements.
These sightings constitute an alarming new pattern in drifter movements. The fleet identified in readout was the largest concentration of drifter ships encountered in a Hive system since the Highland Tukos broadcast of YC-116. The fleets encountered in HTAC ADOC and Rens are the largest concentrations encountered since the Throne Worlds campaign, where the drifters and the Amar Navy engaged in pitched battle. Experts have been baffled by the combination of intact shields with severe structure damage. The cause of the damage remains unknown.
Independent observers are clamouring for more information. The Arataka Research Consortium urges pilots to come forward with any information that could shed light on these mysterious new incursions by the drifters. This is Cyrillian Voth
and Elinari Rhodan
in Rens, reporting for the Discourse.
Hello and good evening everybody, and welcome to a new shiny thing that we are trying out for the first time. I'm not here on my own for once. I have people here with me. Hello everybody else.
Hello.
Hello. Hello. Well, hey there.
Yes. So, welcome to the inaugural episode of the Crystal Ball. That's what we're going with, isn't it? Crystal Ball lore panel. There are many lore panels like this in the past, but this one is ours. And we have quite a few interesting things to talk about today. But first, I need to introduce the people who will be here with me. I am, of course, Elinari Rhodan. My lovely co-host for the day, as ever, will be Cerulean Voth.
Hello, I am here to be Elinari's beautiful assistant. I am the cat to her Blofeld.
That's a reference I've not heard in a while. And the people who are going to enlighten us with all this newfound knowledge are Makoto Priano.
Well, hello there.
And the man with the unpronounceable surname, Uriel Anteovnuecci.
Yes, you got it. Hello,
yes! First time for everything.
Well done.
Oh, actually, Uriel, on that note, did you see when someone thought you were a CCP character and that some writer was playing a cruel trick on the announcers?
I did indeed. That was a good little bit on that Reddit thread. Laughed about that for a little bit.
It's one of those surnames where you look at it and you go, wait, what? And then you kind of get it. But yes, this is the inaugural episode, so we're still working out some style things, exactly what we want to do with it, but we're going to go with it. As you might expect from a load of lore stuff heading your way, we are fans of tinfoil. We really are. And there is a massive tinfoil warning all over this. This information that we're bringing to you is coming via data mining, backstory to events that are coming and previous events as well, and so on and so on. So if you're really, really interested, but you don't want to be spoiled for particularly new shiny things that are coming up, you might want to tune out now. So we'll give you this warning right now. And also because it is all tinfoil and speculation, we may be right, and that would be fantastic. But we may also be wrong. But if we're wrong, that means there's another awesome explanation for the same thing. It's a kind of you win some, you win some, I guess?
Let's go with that. Though, you know, I would like to not be horribly wrong just because, you know, we've got a reputation to maintain.
Yes, we've done well so far. Let's try and keep it.
Well, I invite anyone who doesn't like spoilers to come back after FanFest and see how much we got wrong. Then feel free to laugh at us on Twitter.
Oh yes, laughing is definitely encouraged.
Yeah, we've had plenty of that before too. So, it even says in the show notes here, let's start with an easy one, and I can't put it any better myself. I have in big letters here, the Society of Conscious Thought Battleship.
It's big! It's spiky!
All good ways to describe it. Yeah, basically, this thing is a little bit on the easier side, explaining-wise. As we have seen in the past, at the 5th anniversary and the 10th anniversary of EVE, with the Apotheosis and Gnosis shuttle and battle cruisers, respectively, CCP seems to want to release a Society of Conscious Thought ship every 5 years, not counting the Sunesis, which was a little on the offside, but also that one was the only model left of the Society of Conscious Thought models, all of which have been in the game for actually a very long time, that had not been used for a playable ship at the time. So this one is an entirely new hull, completely new model, nothing we saw before, and it's got some nice stuff going for it, so...
It's super spiky.
Extremely.
Is it me, or does it look a lot like a giant Sunesis?
In some ways, yeah. There's the middle part especially is kind of it has some, it looks like you mashed a Sunesis and a Gnosis together and made the middle part of the hull the size of an Apocalypse. This thing is actually really huge, and I can imagine it's going to be a lot of fun for bumping, looking at the size of that front sail thing.
So to interject and step back a moment, the Destroyer, that one's the only one that's sort of odds out on the gifting pattern, and that was when Alpha Clones went live. The Society gave out gifts then, right?
If I remember correctly, yes, that sounds right. After all, a ship flyable by any character with extremely low skills or no skills at all, that also seems to match very well with all Society of Conscious Thought ships thus far. Now, I'm wondering if they'll continue that with the Battleship, because that would be also super fun, seeing alpha fleets full of giant gold-colored ships.
Very nice.
Is this one going to have much utility apart from bumping?
Now, see, that's something we don't actually know yet. Every bit of its stats right now are just placeholder, really, all copied from one Amar Battleship. And if we can, I don't know, it likely won't come up for a little while yet anyhow, considering the 15th anniversary of EVE won't be coming till May 6th, I believe it was.
Yeah, though we can probably tinfoil about what it's likely to be, which is to say it's going to have a fairly balanced slot layout so that you can either shield or armor tank it as you please. It's going to probably have weapons bonuses, moderate ones to all types of weapons, and then it will probably have even resistances across the board for shield and armor. Just those are the design specifications that we saw for the Gnosis and the Sunesis, so we're probably going to see the same thing here.
Certainly makes sense. In addition to something else that we know it does have, if you can look at it, I'm not sure if we have a video of that up yet, or you can look at it on Singularity, actually, if you get the right link to it. But it's got some very nice effects on the front side of it especially. Some parts of it that are actually not dissimilar from a ring around the Sisters of Eve ships. I'm not sure how much of that will actually mean anything, but there's something to that, so it's something to keep in mind.
I'm like, the video of it is up now, and it does look really cool. Like you say, it keeps the design of the was it the Sunesis and the Apotheosis?
Honestly, it's sort of a nice blending of the design elements of those. They do a pretty good job with those, and bringing it back together for a new model after who knows how many years.
Yeah, and the Apotheosis, yes, you are correct. That is the shuttle. Remarkably pretty shuttle, but also, because it was gifted about a decade ago, not enough of them necessarily to really allow you to fly around in gold-plated bling of that particular variety without having something shiny on the field.
Of course, that doesn't mean we can't try, so...
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I think people frequently do. So with one shiny ship out of the way, also coming up soon, we have the Guristas events.
Yeah, so this seems to be a seasonal event, so in many ways it will be much as we've seen before, which is, say, probably a variety of sites. I would guess that comparable to the gala, they will have a VIP equivalent site and a standard site. We have seen bosses in the database that are both battleship size, so probably I would say something rattlesnake derived, and then also a dreadnought for the big boss type site. And my guess is that the big boss will be where you get the shiny hunter ballistic control units that also serve as drone damage amps. And these are really funky modules that are going to be probably only available during this and comparable events in the future. So odds are they're going to be very expensive, but the flip side is that they are wonderful for worms, helas, and rattlesnakes, or any other sort of drone plus missile boat.
Is this like an officer mod?
Well, it's going to be faction, so it's sort of like, you know, your Dread Guristas, whatever, and so on. And it's going to be drop mitigated, but, you know, the question is how many people are going to try to hunt down NPC dreadnoughts and win if these are using the new NPC AI, which is quite likely.
Could be some hilarious kill mails there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the gala sites surprised rather a lot of people with how the NPCs were warping to pings and then warping on and couldn't be really kited and, you know, so on and so forth. I mean, it's one of those things where, you know, people expect NPCs to be dumb and sort of just parade into weapons fire, and that's not quite the case anymore.
Yeah, the new AI for NPCs is still just that. It's still fairly new, and it's still being constantly iterated on, if I remember right as well.
Oh, absolutely. And CCP is, you know, constantly trying new things. We see various test NPC AI ships in the database on Singularity, you know, here and there. And each time they roll out something new, they might port it back to prior systems. They might wait until they have a reason to iterate on those old systems. But you know, we've seen it stepping forward with each major release, like Resource Warfare, the NPC mining fleets at the outset, and then also shipyards and FOB, and then its first real wide-scale deployment in the Guardian's Gala. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with this one.
And how easy it's going to be to break it.
As always.
No AI is foolproof, sadly.
As the QA manager there happens to know.
So, do we reckon this Guristas event is going to be follow very much the similar patterns as the previous ones then? So, go to a site, interact with the AI, and get shiny things?
Yeah, so that's the general flow of it, and we expect that much like the previous ones, that there will be some shiny new skins, the Hunter's Quiver skins. The interaction, though, there might actually be a wrinkle to it, well, two wrinkles to it. The first is that we have seen something that looks like a Guristas secure depot or something like that, that will require hacking. So there will be a hacking component in at least some of the sites, and also that this is quite literally an egg hunt. There are defunct capsules that players are going to need to gather to be rewarded by the powers that be.
A literal egg hunt. That's
Gurister, if you wish.
A Gurista bunny, yeah.
CCPY.
Oh, that's a pun we made in one of my old alliances way back when I first started playing EVE. It's like, oh, we used to hide containers around in deep space and do like a treasure hunt type thing. And it's like, oh, it's the Gurista bunny. It's nice to see that that's actually a thing now.
Yeah, I'm sure our friend Varone was thinking the same thing.
And a quick thing from Twitch chat. It seems like the in the gala event, some of the very shiny rewards were possible to obtain through standard sites. It's just that you had a far higher likelihood of getting them in the VIP sites. So there will be additional sources of the BCUs and so on.
So more risk, more reward.
As it should be.
Yeah, exactly. As is often the way.
You know, we've been talking about the bunnies and the Guristas having the rabbit and the rest of it for a while, but I've literally only just now realized that the word Gurista is Gur Easter. I'm like, oh, God.
The face palm is real now, right? Any more to be said on the Guristas and their wonderful piratey ways?
Not really. I mean, from a lore and backstory side, they've been fairly quiet recently. The last deep backstory stuff we have for the Guristas is that they were sort of taking over a lot of hidden research sites, but we figured that was tied in with Valkyrie. So it'll be interesting to see what CCP does with this, and it might just be a seasonal with not much lore to it, or well, we might have rather more to it.
Might they be looking for ways to... I don't know, I mean, they've now sold the Newcastle studio, haven't they? So does that mean that they're basically not doing Valkyrie anymore? So are they going to try and work that into the lore, or work it out of the lore, or what do we think they're going to do with that?
I think there's definitely some thoughts about that. It'd be very disappointing to have built up some of these little bits of backstory without bringing any of them to a conclusion, especially with the fact that it seems like the Quartermaster, Schism, and Valkyrie are in a three-way, sort of thing right now with them, and also the Drifters, and we have no idea where that's going. So I'd like to see at least something of that maybe come up in news articles once in a while. And maybe during this event they'll bring something up with that. Who knows?
Yeah, certainly the last tie-in that we saw with the Drifters, which was the Warzone extraction, indicated that there was a point of interest that brought Valkyrie and the Drifters together. So they might continue elements of that, but then, of course, there's the Valkyrie question. So I don't know. We'll have to wait and see on this one, I think.
Yeah, but hopefully it won't all just kind of fade away into the distance, and hopefully we will get some more snippets and references and things for it again, because it was pretty darn cool. So from the Guristas to the Drifters, what have the Drifters been up to lately?
A lot, apparently. A lot we don't know about yet, and a lot that they may not have wanted to be up to, judging by their ships. So a lot of what's been seen lately started with a first encounter in the Redoubt Hive, where there was, upon jumping through one of the warp gates in the Hive site, a 25-strong Drifter fleet, which immediately attacked and completely killed, popped the pod of, and collected the corpse of our friend Counselor Mallow, if I remember correctly.
That is most certainly correct. Yeah, he Leroyed the gate, and we were about to follow, and actually we did start following, and he was, of course, on comms going, get out of here.
Many things, much death.
It was fun to have fitted a cloak that day, coincidentally, and I got some pictures of that at least. I was able to count them. And all Apollo and Artemis, Tyrannos, nothing, super unusual with the names, but then we started taking a look at the ships themselves and noticed that every single one of them was extremely damaged deep into their hull. I know this is... So the way we know this was almost certainly a thing set by the devs and not just a player using smart bombs or something like that, is that they were all around, I think it was 15% hull HP, every single one of them.
Yeah, and for that matter, there are not normally that many drifters in the entirety of a hive system, much less in one location. So things were afoot, and, or rather, I suppose, the game was afoot. And we, of course, then saw more of this when another drifter ball of about 30 appeared in HTAC ADOC in Curse, which happened to be the new triumvirate staging system.
Oh, I bet they had a fun time dealing with that, if indeed they did.
Well, that's the weird thing. So the drifters, despite being a giant ball of raging death, if they're in K-space, they're not terribly aggressive unless you happen to be on the wrong location. So these drifters just sort of ended up hanging out on a gate and, you know, trying to conga line around to collect corpses, as of course there were a bunch of players death cloning back to their prior staging so that they could bring ships through. But naturally, as with all things in EVE, if it's there, we must kill it. And so an enterprising bomber pilot from the League of Svelte Men basically, once their AI broke, started hitting them with bombs. And the drifters, of course, the AI hasn't really been set up to deal with that. So they summarily died in explosions and fire, as you do.
As we like to see.
Oh yeah, I mean, killing drifters is good fun. And that was about the end of that for the second instant. And then the next day there were another first 28 and then 16, which is to say a total of 44 drifters in Rennes, as someone evidently had told him it was still a trade hub.
Apparently.
And this, of course, being in high sec, you know, you can't use capitals, you can't use bombs. They're really sticky once you get to, like, above 15 drifters, as our incursion doctrines are only good to that number. So we just sort of threw coercers at them until they blew up, which, yeah, it's like, okay, we lost 100 coercers, killed 44 drifters. I'll take it.
That's not terrible odds, considering the drifters are flying essentially battleships, and coercers are a lot cheaper than that to replace.
Most certainly. Although after they were first removed, seconds later, a reinforcement wave of the same types of damaged drifters also all warped in, much to our amusement.
It's like, okay, gang, here we go again.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, we just took care of a ball. Do we have to do... Okay, we have to do it again.
Has anyone else that we know of tried to interact with them / take them on in a more organized way, I was going to say, if that makes sense?
Well, in recent history, not really. So in the intervening period, there was a group that we've interacted with by the name of Seraph that was also doing operations in drifter hives, led by Elizabeth. And, you know, they were definitely, you know, they're shaking the pom-poms and going straight for drifter genocide, so fun times there. But, you know, they're currently winning EVE, so it's one of those things where it's like, well, I guess it's to us because no one else is really killing the drifters right now.
It's our sworn and solemn duty.
Yeah, though it is worth saying that a lot of players do interact with the Arithmos drifters because they don't have the super weapon, but are instead sort of like cruiser mobility dreadnoughts, and also packed the gills with blue loot. They're a much more tempting target for your average person because, you know, your Apollo and Arithmos Apollo and Artemis drifters, you know, they're only worth like 5 million a pop, and they can usually insta-kill sort of any sub-capital out there.
So the weird thing about these fleets that we've been seeing in high sec as well is the damage thing, because they still... because we had another instance of them in Sapala as well, and that was the biggest one we've seen so far, I believe. Was there like 50 or something of them?
I think it was 51 at max. Wasn't that also the one that utterly ripped apart an orca that happened to have some corpses in its cargo hold when it hit the gate?
I think so.
So the drifters were like, loot!
I guess so.
Delicious corpses, yes, give me your cadavers.
So we know they use them for something. Whether or not it's what they're described as using them for in the tutorial, we don't know. But, you know, maybe something. Maybe they use them, incorporate the biomass into their ships, use it for something else. Still stuff we have yet to find out. Speaking of biomass, we still have nothing told about why they wanted all those parts of that old Jove ambassador. So I guess we'll find that in the future, maybe as well.
Yes, and until then, they heartily enjoyed their beautiful drifter pinata.
Now, talking of people fighting drifters in an organised way, You're saying that not many player groups have been trying this, but it seems now that the NPCs had a go.
So that was a fun one to hear about, yeah. So I think it was it CCP Burger who mentioned it first? About how there was... So this was an instance of literal emergent gameplay where no player was involved with this, but there was a battle between the Blood Raiders from a forward operating base and an NPC mining fleet that basically one warped to the other's place and they all began fighting. And then drifters showed up here as well. And that all ended with shooting between different AIs and a little bit of fun happening there, none of which players saw, but we found out about because of CCP, and they described it a little more in depth in the CSM minutes, I believe it was.
Yeah. So this is pretty cool. And not necessarily in itself. I mean, obviously, if no one saw it, that kind of isn't the point. But it suggests that we could start to see this more often.
The possibilities are definitely a fun part. We haven't seen this sort of thing, really, since the Drifter incursions were a thing, and we all remember quite fondly how well that wasn't quite working back then, with Drifters shooting each other as well as the MR, and a lot of back and forth there that really didn't seem to be working as planned. Though, so with this happening seemingly more or less unintentionally, and still seeming to work out in an interesting way, that sounds like a lot of fun, potentially.
Though I must say that for initial deployment, I mean, it's not terribly surprising that it did break to some degree, but the system did get to working. They did, in fact, make the Drifter incursions work, and the NPCs did engage each other properly. But the fobs are actually done using a modification of the incursion system. So if you've ever run a fob, you'll notice that you get a notification that you're getting 0 Concord LP or something like that. And this is because it's using the incursion backend. So it's essentially a stealth incursion. And interestingly, the Guristas rats have been spotted blowing up old-style Serpentis NPCs as well. So these new NPCs will in fact engage people however is appropriate for their standings.
Which is a lot of fun, potentially. I like that sound.
Oh, absolutely.
So it would potentially give standings a lot more bearing on them. So just like, oh, yeah, I'm at -7 or whatever with the Blood Raiders, and then you happen to go through an area where the Blood Raiders are, and then you just see, oh, they're attacking me. Oh, they really don't like me, do they?
Yeah, which then of course feeds into this interesting question of, well, as we've said, the developers are continuing to iterate on this AI. They are doing new deployments. You know, started with NPC mining fleets, sort of a soft thing. Then it went into shipyards and fobs and the deployment with the Guardian's Gala. Well, we've also seen in the database that the Drifters are due to get a couple of new ships. So there's a Drifter Battleship and a Drifter Cruiser in there, and these are under the NPC classification header of Drifter Reinforcements. So it seems like they're going to go back to the Drifters and iterate on that initial Blackboard AI testbed and basically bring in a lot of the developments that they've worked on for those later iterations of the AI.
Fun stuff.
Yeah, God help us all if the Drifter standings actually start counting for something, right?
Indeed.
We're all screwed.
Of those, exactly. And the new ships as well, the cruiser itself, it has a nice design. I don't know, do we have a video of that as well? Or
yes, you've beat me to it because I always had the Battleship stuff still. So cruisers, here we go.
All right. So with that as well, though, there's the Drifter... I forget the name of the exact NPC, but there's the cruiser one. Then there's the one that Mac mentioned as a battleship, which may not necessarily stay as a battleship either. We don't even know yet. There's no model associated with it as far as I know, and it only has copy-paste attributes as far as I can tell as well. So maybe we'll end up seeing yet another Drifter all at once. Maybe they'll decide to add a frigate and a cruiser to do the whole lineup all at once, and that'd be a lot of fun too. And they've also done they've added a medium version of the Lux Kontos turret, the Lux Xiphos, which, and Xiphos is another, I believe, was it Byzantine type of like weapon or something?
It's certainly Greek. I can't remember if it's classical Greek or Byzantine Greek, but just a bit of deep backstory on the drifter names. While we don't know the names of the incoming drifters, we have seen two distinct naming themes for the drifters. Apollo and Artemis are obviously classical Greek gods, but Hikanta and Arithmos are actually referencing Byzantine army regiments, essentially. Hikanta is actually referencing Hikanatoi, which are, I believe, defenders of the imperial palace, and the Arithmos are sort of like a city watch, but were also employed to defend diplomats or prisoners of war.
Which is a fun little bit on its own if you think about when they show up.
I mean, so does this suggest that we're going to see some new PvE content relating to drifters? I mean, if they're getting new ships, can we expect to see new types of sites or new types of interactions? It sounds a little bit like the kind of thing they did with NPC mining fleets, which of course uses the same AI, doesn't it?
It most certainly does. As to whether we're going to see more PvE content involving drifters, I mean, presumably they are, at the very least, iterating on the content that's already in game, but, you know, they wouldn't be sending drifter fleets around in New Eden if they didn't have some sort of plan. What exactly that entails is an excellent question. It could be that, for all we know, they may be intended to attack player structures. It may be that they are intended to provide something a little bit more dynamic for the drifter content generally, because drifters are a player favorite. Or it could be that there's something big coming down the pipe. But if so, it's most certainly not the March release.
So the cruiser itself, the video for that is running right now. It just reminds me of a giant stingray. And I mean,
there's a lot of that sort of aesthetic with drifter ships.
Yeah, I mean,
angles, but
angles and
broad
spikiness.
Angles. Yeah.
But the wings aspect of it, I can't think of any other. Okay, apart from the Barghest and that line of ships, any other ships that really have this kind of like sweeping wing style design to it? That seems quite different.
Well, so think of what is that type of insect? Is it a sea skate? The ones that skim on the surface of water with widely splayed legs, relying on surface tension?
Yeah, so they have different names, but yeah.
Yeah, so with drifters, you've got the spines that sort of function sort of like a jellyfish's tentacles, and it sort of contracts, and there are sparks going along them, and it's sort of probably intended to indicate interaction with gravity or space-time, or, choose your technobabble. So what if the spikes on the cruiser here are actually sort of similar, but it's more like a seaskate type of approach to things?
That's an interesting thought, actually. More kind of like a searchy way, yeah.
Yeah, and the drifters don't use any sort of propulsive drive such as we know, so hey, why not?
Yeah, if it works, it works. If it sounds cool, it definitely works.
Rule of cool.
Now,
rule of cool is true.
Talking of new ships, there's more, isn't there?
Yes, indeed. I don't know if anyone has been keeping up with things, but for those of you who haven't, in addition to all these other things we're seeing on Singularity right now, specific number of 3 very interesting additional new ships have shown up under a completely, as of yet, unseen faction. In the files, they're called Triglavian ships, and there is a paint scheme within those that mentions a name for them called the Triglavian Collective. Now, these ships are extremely strange, very different indeed, with a new certain aesthetic that's definitely present in all of them, where there is a large red ball type thing in the middle of the ship, glowing and bright and dangerous and very interesting looking. There's also something with that seems to have been teased a little earlier on. Mac, if you want to talk about that.
Absolutely. So we got our first view of the Singularity, such as it is, with what was reputed to be a leaked Concord Directive Intelligence Agency case red gamma, right?
Yep.
Yeah, a case red gamma intel file, and it's basically a 2-second skirt around of some sort of sphere with heavy interference. And so the initial thought is like, well, is this some sort of star? I mean, it looks like it has that plasma patterning, so that's the most reasonable thing to think. But you know, the first thing we started thinking is like, okay, well, there's some sort of wormhole behind it, or some sort of wormhole-y thing. And there are spikes in the background that are moving far too quickly for it to be a star, unless it's an absolutely massive structure. And I think at this point, our consensus is that the leak is a shot of the singularity on the cruiser in its sieged state, because these ships have something that's going to be either like a bastion mode, or like a siege mode, or a triage mode, or something like that. Like they're going to have some sort of active state.
And that comes by reading the sound effects present in the files as well. The names of those indicate a few things that seem sort of fun with that.
Like, for instance, even in their, you know, siege state, quote unquote, they can go to warp, which is something new and completely unexpected. That's something that we haven't encountered with any other ship, where if you're in your active state, you are trapped in place, you are immobile.
That
And
sounds
perhaps,
quite terrifying.
Perhaps this sort of thing here has something to do with why the drifters seem to have been having such a hard time with them. If that is indeed why why they're damaged. But that seems like a pretty safe direction to start thinking about things in.
Yeah, but here's where it gets weird. So we've seen the Triglavian Collective ships. Oh, actually, let's backtrack a moment and talk about Triglav. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Go for it.
So, just because names are always indicative of something, CCP doesn't necessarily name things with, you know, just like, oh, hey, this is a cool name, let's go for it sort of mindset. Triglav is a Slavic god aspect that is the assembled godhead, as it were, of the king of the underworld, the king of earth, and the king of heaven. Hence, the name starting with Tri. And so the question is like, okay, well, if this is the Triglavian or Triglavian Collective, you've got this collective representing the underworld, the earth, and the heavens. So who are these guys, and what are they doing that they have such remarkable and resounding control of space-time manipulation technology?
Certainly a number of very tantalizing possibilities for that. I'm sure we each have our own sorts of theories on those too. I don't know if you'd want to talk about some of the why behind that and then go into what they might be.
Well, we've got a forked conversation. So I guess the question now is, do we want to go into tinfoiling and deep backstory on who these are, or first off get into the fact that these are pilotable ships?
Yes, that is
talk
that
about
one.
second point.
The whole thing, pilotable, big floaty things with death balls of doom. That sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, big death balls of doom that seem to be, you know, kicking in the teeth of drifters.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Right, so
Not
these
to
are not just
mention,
NPCs, they're things that players can fly. Definitely.
So,
right?
as it seems so far, so the vessels themselves on Singularity are only able to be previewed and, you know, rotated around in those videos you're seeing the way they are, because yes, they are in the database as ships. Unlike the drifters are, you know, where it's basically an NPC, you can't preview that model, you can't rotate it around. These ships are specifically player pilotable if CCP so wishes to allow us to use them. And not to mention they're quite good looking. There's also a bit of something there with the fact that the base paint scheme on them is a red color. Thinking of how the Concorde ships are also a sort of blue color, as we can fly them. And then there's also a second paint scheme, which is the one where we get the name Triglavian Collective from, that is likely a different color altogether, just like you would see the Concorde police ships, the SWAT battleships, you know, army colors, ones that we cannot use, representing or represented by the NPCs.
So, of course, it's worth saying that if these models are being developed, there could very well be NPCs that do end up using them as well. We just haven't seen the type IDs or the indications that NPCs like this are coming. So, you know, we can pull these up. We can see that they have temporary stats, and they have weapons mountings, and they have masteries and those types of things. But this isn't to say that CCP won't then go, okay, cool, now that we've sorted that, it's now time for us to make all the NPCs on this base layer. But whatever it means in regard to players, there is certainly time for, more to be done on CCP's side.
Do you think this is all going to be revealed and explained at FanFest?
I'd say there's a pretty solid chance we'll see something of these very exciting looking developments at FanFest. They seem to save a lot of hype for that type of that time of year. And personally, I'm very excited to see whatever this year's cinematic might be, given what we're seeing so far.
Oh yeah. Last year was fairly low key. There's a lot of maintenance going on. There's a lot of wrapping up the structure development timeline. But it definitely seems like CCP has something big coming our way. And certainly, they wouldn't be throwing around giant balls of drifter death if they didn't have some sort of storyline. Which, of course, brings back, okay, well, we have a bunch of damaged drifters showing up. Clearly, they've been, we can assume, fighting the Triglavian Collective. Are we going to be entering into a three-way war? Or will we find that the drifters have already won? Or that the drifters have lost and now we're going to try in their stead?
That's a lot of the why behind this that we really just don't have yet. There's a lot of directions this could go to, given some of the little cues we've had that we could sort of draw into this. First off, probably being the Pharos of Thera accusing Concord a little while back, if you remember that, with the time-based collection and the small attack on that by, what was his name, the Astromancer?
Yeah, though what we have to remember is that, well, two things. In the first place, CCP Delegate Zero's current head lore guy, and he is devious. And, And secondly, that the lone crazed voice in the woods is likely to be mistaken to some degree. There's likely a kernel of truth there, but what exactly it means and what exactly how exactly it relates to the truth is going to be a question. For instance, Pharos is saying, Concord is developing this terrible weapon to fight drifters and they are hiding it from everyone. But at the same time, we are getting footage of the ships from basically Concord's spy agency, which means it might not be them developing it.
Indeed, with that, yeah. And there are a couple of possibilities if it's not something Concord-based for what it may be, and those sort of branch into very distinct directions. I don't know if you'd want to talk about some of that next.
Well, it seems like the perfect segue into the tinfoil part.
I'd say.
What are your guesses?
Okay, let's take turns then. Okay, so guess one is that... Okay, so in wormhole space, in sleeper space, there are recurring themes of plague and evacuation, that whomever was there was fleeing something. And as we sort of gather from Templar 1's Jove dump, it's probably the Jovian disease. They're trying to flee the collapse of their society and the infighting that results in all the etc., etc., etc. So
right, and this is where we get the name Anoikis and a lot of the names of sites in wormhole space, don't we?
Absolutely. Recurring biological themes, lots of imagery of plague and evacuation and things being abandoned quickly. So what if these are the sleepers or the caretakers that fled and didn't collapse or go into a torpor to try to await the salvation of their society? What if the evacuation was successful and the Triglavian Collective is the result of the evacuation of ancient Jove?
A very interesting possibility, to be sure.
That's really... Yeah, that ties in a lot of different elements that have been established for a long time as well. And it's pretty plausible, I think. But
what if the drifters are the returning plagued ones who have tried to combat their Jove disease degeneration with implants or by the digitization of their infomorphs? I mean, there are still enough unknowns that either could be easily true, but Uriel, would you like to go for the other option?
I certainly would. Now, you ended that by speaking on what the drifters, could be with that sort of situation. But at the same time, with them possibly being something on the side of the Watcher type stuff you're mentioning, or the ones leaving, there's also still the just as likely possibility that they could be something like, if anyone remembers, the Others, plural that is, revealed specifically by Templar 1. Now, the Other itself was the one that was in Jamil's head that everyone knew about, but there were also many other Others, I'm saying that a lot, aren't I, that were still within the Sleeper construct, and essentially it being the Matrix, they wanted to tell everyone it was fake. And presumably, they wanted nothing to do with it. So if the Drifters have anything to do with that, my personal favorite theory on that, not to say I invest in it wholly, but it's my thought that the Drifters could be a combination of Others who didn't have bodies in the first place, and Sleepers wanting to leave their Matrix, who also needed to leave, getting together and doing their own sort of thing, taking up the mantle of the old Jove, the Tyrannos, or the Tyrants, as we knew them from the Second Empire, and going off to do their own thing. But then you do have the now appearance of this Triglavian Collective, which at first glance seems to be very, very in opposition to these Drifters. And given the reaction of the also mentioned Watchers, the Anteovnuecci, the people in charge of the Sleeper construct for the longest time, there's a possibility it could go that sort of direction as well, with them, obviously fighting them very, very violently given their ship's states. And the bits of technology we see a little bit of, at least suggested, if not completely false, if not completely true, with Triglavian ships, and the idea of some sort of Talocan technology. Not to say that it would be them. Perhaps these Watchers have watched from somewhere else and are keeping an eye and now doing their own thing. But maybe they're using some of this technology, maybe it's their own thing. And there's also the possibility that perhaps these Triglavian people could be something of the actual Talocan. If Mac, you want to talk a little about that.
Now I'm going to jump in here now, because every time I hear the word Talocan, immediately I was like, right, this is Makoto's time, go.
Well, so there's actually one question. So this is going to be a digression, so I apologize. But Talocan, we say it with a hard C, but if you actually transliterate it to Greek, it might be something more like Taliesin, which is, say, like of Talos, yep, which is the bronze automata that circles Crete 3 times daily to protect the Queen of Crete or something. I can't recall exactly the bit. My Greek mythology is a bit dated, but if anything is going to be a bronze automata protecting the island against interlopers, the Drifter seems a likely suspect for that. But that's, of course, extensive digression. The thing that I'm going to harp on here is actually that we do need to remember that if they're referencing Triglav, it's a 3-headed god. It's a collective. It's an alliance of 3. So what would be representative of the underworld? What would be representative of the heavens? What would be representative of the earth? Would the underworld be the sleepers, sleeping in the mausoleum of Anoikis? Could the heavens be the others, the naturally arising intelligences that spawned in that mausoleum but wanted to be free? What are the creatures of the earth? Could that be the caretakers or Anteovnuecci? If we, for instance, take an idea that the Drifters are an automated defense system that was finally activated in the collapse of the Talocan infrastructure with Carolyn's star, which is totally, completely tinfoil, and who has the faintest idea about that, could it be that they are sort of a rogue defense system, and the Triglavian Collective is actually a truer representation of the awakening sleepers?
That's a whole lot of loose ends coming together.
Oh yeah. Specifically, there's a nice little point talking about the Macabre prophecy with, what was it? Many become one when one becomes 4?
Yeah, so the last confirmed Macabre prophecy entry that we have is when the drifters come home, or rather, when the drifters started to appear, CCP made a reference to the little brother makes his final steps home, or final sorrowful steps home. He is not welcome. So the drifters are clearly intended to be the little brother, and they're not welcome, clearly. But is it that they're not welcome by us? Is it not welcome by the sleepers?
And that's
or
just
by
part of the
anybody.
question.
Or by anybody. Yeah, and that's the thing, is like we've got so many loose ends here that, who are the Enhedwani or the caretakers, who are the Talakan or Taliesin, who are actually others or the other or such. There are a lot of potential ways that these masks could be juggled between the players. But,
I think that is several rolls of tinfoil put together right there.
yeah.
It takes a lot of it.
Like, not to pour too much cold water on this because I'm loving it, but I've been going pretty much with the expectation that the Taliesin are surely well and truly gone. I mean, even the Jove are gone, and if the Taliesin were still around, they could be making... They're almost too powerful to exist. They would throw off the balance of power. My
Honestly,
bet is
yeah.
that they're not actually the Taliesin, but maybe remnants of technology of reverse engineered something. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I like to think that might end up being something more along those lines. Because if a civilization that's capable of grand scale stellar engineering comes into contact with the rest of what we have here, I don't know if that's going to be a very even face-off. So we'll see what that happens with.
Yeah, so all storyline development naturally runs into a bit of an issue with the actual question of game balance. But, at the same time, there's no saying that the Taliesin, if they were to return, would necessarily need to still be in their high state. This could be a devolved Taliesin. It could be that it's the Enhedwani or something else having recovered or developed the technology. Of course, we don't actually... No, go for it.
Just like the Jove were much fallen from their earlier glories.
Yeah, and here's one thing that it's something that those of you who have tinfoiled with me in the Tweet Fleet lore channel know that I harp on periodically. So Templar 1 is sort of the quintessential Jove and Sleeper history lore dump. There's a lot there given in essentially monologue form. But all of the things that we've heard, whether it's in Inheritance or Templar 1 or Theodicy or any of the other potential sources for Jovian lore, all of them are from the perspective of someone in the universe. So the names change, the perspectives change, and we have varying issues with unreliable narrators. It could be that the Enhedwani or the Talakan or Taliesin or the caretakers, that these are all various names that we hear for, the same character in the story. It's just that we never encounter them with the frequency from a given perspective to actually put that name to, to another face.
So all this, so many questions. This is the ongoing thing with Eve, is this anything new that gets brought in isn't just something new that gets brought in and it's something cool. It's always got all these questions about it as to why and how and who and how does it fit in with everything else. And there usually are lots of little tiebacks to other things that people might not know about or might not click with straight away. And that's part of what makes it awesome. But I think with these ones, these are throwing up a lot more questions than they're answering. At least for now.
Indeed, yeah. Although a lot of that's sort of the fun part with how CCP seems to like to construct their lore. It's never that something, like you said, just sort of comes out of the blue. There's always some sort of relevance, some sort of connection to things we've already seen so far. And it's just a matter of figuring out what pieces go where.
And for that matter, when they leave loose ends, it's so that they can, in fact, continue building that story. So, the questions that they leave for us, it's intentional on their part, simply because if you've got an ongoing narrative, you can't tie it off neatly.
It's true. It is a very, very much a living, evolving world, a living, evolving universe, and it's fantastic for that.
I know you're keen to see the cinematic, Mac, but for me, I'm just really hoping for a chronicle.
Oh, yeah.
Especially given that it's been, as of, I think, mid-February, I think it was over a year exactly since the release of the last chronicle we've seen.
What was the last one? Was that Sine Wave Alpha, or was the one after that?
I think it was... Was it Sine Wave Alpha?
I think it was Sine Wave Alpha, though I do know that there was a bit on what happened at the Shathel Sin that came out somewhere about that time as well.
Yeah, that was Sunset, I'm pretty sure. That was from back in October of 2016, if I remember correctly.
You have a far better memory on that than I do.
We will take your word for it.
Nicely done, nicely done.
So for now, we're left with lots of questions and some pieces of the puzzle. Maybe next time when we reconvene, we might have a few more pieces, or be able to throw some pieces in the bin and go, no, they're from a different puzzle altogether. So who knows?
Yeah, I think the only thing we do know is that CCP is building towards something, and I think I can take the liberty of speaking for all of us and saying that I'm very interested to figure out what that is.
Oh yes. It's going to be big and shiny and probably spiky and probably want to kill us all.
All the
That's
things
what
we
we
need.
Are there any final thoughts, closing words from anybody before we end it for our first ever session?
There's already a lot of stuff that I'd like to say that Mac already sort of tied up right there. I'd just like to add how excited I am for what's coming up as well. And with FanFest not being very far out now, I don't think we'll have to wait too long before we start seeing some very fun stuff. So, cheers to that.
Should be good. Mac, any final thoughts from you?
No, I dare say we've covered it. I mean, we have a lot of questions going forward, but I can only assume that CCP has a devilish plan that involves lots of explosions, drifters, and new and strange sights for us. So, yeah.
Last but not least, Cyrillian.
I just can't wait. It's going to be so cool.
The childish glee is more than evident. But yeah, if no one else has any further thoughts, we may as well wrap it there for this time. And we've actually had quite a few comments in Twitch chat as well. I've only just realised.
Yeah, well, the tinfoil is something people love, and especially when it comes to drifters. I mean, it's a storyline that unfortunately had gone into torpor a little bit, but it had gone into torpor a little bit because CCP was using them to build towards something. The drifters appeared sort of as an evolution of the prophecy sort of objective of new space and new mechanics, and this sort of outside of context problem that the players would need to deal with in an evolving world. So we'll have to see what exactly they mean to do with the return of the Drifter storyline.
And we will all be here to talk about it and tinfoil about it even more when that happens, I am pretty sure. So with that, I think we have another Discord episode, I think. The one with the actual Drifter footage. The Code Red Alpha footage that you mentioned earlier. And I think that seems like a good way to end it, don't you?
Yes, let's.
Okay. Until next time, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for asking questions. And we will no doubt see you again.
Good night.
Good night.
Footage from a recent Concord operation, Case Red Gamma, was leaked this afternoon to major Capsuleer news organisations, including Eve News 24, the Imperium News Network, and Crossing Zebras. Case Red Gamma is Concord's coding for Drifter-related threat analysis. The Arataka Research Consortium has begun attempts to reconstruct the data, which appears to show unusual behaviour from a star. Interference with the image is heavy, however, and theories are already running rampant. We go to ARC Diplomatic Liaison Losarina Rask for more.
We're mainly interested in two things: the changing luminosity of the stellar object and the silhouette in the lower left. All indications are that this is a new drifter-related phenomenon and might be the source of the damaged fleets we saw this past weekend.
More news as it develops. This is Elinari Rhodan in Aceres, reporting for the Discourse.